Welcome, everyone, to this special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is our post-U.S. Open recap with Hall of Fame tennis journalist Steve Flink. We begin with the champion Jannik Sinner. We get into some topics in regards to his opponent in the final, Taylor Fritz. We talk Daniil Medvedev. We talk the other two semifinalists, Jack Draper and Francis Tiafoe. We go back to the first week at the end, and we address Novak Djokovic, Carlos Alcaraz, and the premature exits that they had from the tournament. All that, plenty more, always a great chat with Steve. Before I get started with that, a reminder that Monday Match Analysis is powered by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. Just because the U.S. Open is over does not mean that the tennis stops. This week, WTA 500 in Guadalajara, Davis Cup as well, which is a lot of fun. I'm glad that this week brings something different, something unique, and it's the group stage of the Davis Cup, which I actually think is the best week of Davis Cup, even better than the finals at the end of November. Head on over to betus.com and use the promo code YouTube150 for a nice 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. Please gamble responsibly and don't harass the players. Without further ado, here's Steve Flink. We're joined once again by Hall of Fame tennis journalist Steve Flink. His latest book is Pete Sampras, Greatness Revisited. It is always a pleasure to do our post-major chat, the traditional post-major recap that we've been doing for many, many years. Steve, welcome back to Monday Match Analysis. I will say, and I want to save it for the end, but I have an idea that I'm going to run it by you at the end of our talk, where I want to do a little bonus chat with you.
Okay, sounds great. Looking forward to hearing the idea.
Okay, it would be during the off season, but let's start with the U.S. Open. Let's start with the men's champion. I don't know how much dissecting of the men's final we're going to end up doing, but let's address the Jannik Sinner of it all. Second major, breakthrough year. Statistically, just a phenomenal year. He's at a 90% win rate as of now. Obviously, he swept the hardcourt majors. It's a very short list of players who have ever done that. You know, Wilander, Federer 3 times, Djokovic 3 times. That's it. I want to start by asking you, what impresses you most about Jannik Sinner right now?
It's a bunch of things. It's the movement, the speed out of the corners. It's the clean ball striking. It's the greatly improved serve, and it's the disposition. Because frankly, Gil, I didn't feel like it. I loved watching him in the final. I really thought we saw something close to his best there. I didn't think we saw it in the earlier rounds. We saw very good tennis and a nice performance against Tommy Paul, and played two very good sets against Medvedev, but I didn't feel he was in peak form, and I frankly didn't like the way he played against Draper at all. I thought that was workmanlike, and that was disciplined and professional, but not his best. But that's what I like about him now. I think the Sinner of a couple of years ago might lose a few of those matches, but right now there's a mental toughness there and a tenacity that in the past was not evident. So it's so many things. He's got a lot of character, Sinner. He does. And you know, Gil, briefly, you mentioned his record and how great his record is. Frankly, I think his record would be even better if he had not been carrying around that knowledge of the drug testing, and he knew about the 2 positive tests, and nobody else knew it for months. So that just explains what I thought were some not up to par performances, even against Alcaraz, taking nothing away from Alcaraz in that French semi. But I thought it was an odd match from Sinner, because in that case, he was up a set and 2 love, and then he was also up 2 sets to 1, and he played well, but I didn't think we saw the best Sinner there. I thought we saw a very uneven Sinner against Medvedev at Wimbledon. I wonder whether a couple of these losses might not have occurred if he'd been in the frame of mind that he showed us at the U.S. Open.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And we, discussing those particular matches, chalked it up to physical breakdowns. But,
Yeah.
you know, who's to say the physical breakdowns weren't partially caused by what was happening in the background, or just that he had trouble fighting through the physical breakdowns? That's a good point though, because in a lot of the losses, we felt like his movement isn't 100% of what we know it can be, and we
Yeah,
certainly saw that in the final. I totally agree with you about the final against Fritz being a kind of a higher level. I mean, the consistency off the ground, just the
yeah,
ability to keep it clean, was something that I thought Jannik was doing on a regular basis after the U.S. Open last year, first couple months of this season.
yes.
But then I hadn't seen it in a while. Even winning Cincinnati, it was great tennis. He won the tournament, but it wasn't quite as clean. But then 14 unforced errors off the ground in a three-set match, and we know that he was ripping the ball. I mean, that's impressive stuff.
Absolutely right. Yeah, he was going for it. I felt like it was free hitting. It was uninhibited. He was going for big shots, but hardly missing, and certainly
Yeah.
not missing when it mattered. And I thought it was a joy to watch him play that well. Unfortunate that for Fritz to be on the receiving end of that performance, but look, it was still a great tournament for him too. I'm really curious to see now. Obviously, hopefully, there's not going to be an appeal on this decision. There seems to be some talk of that, whether there could still be an appeal. I hope that doesn't happen. It seems to me that the way it was resolved was fair. They could have possibly decided to suspend him for a few months rather than just take prize money and points away from Indian Wells. That could be debated, but the notion that this would be overturned, and I hate to see that happen because I'd like to see him be able to move forward. I think he understood that his team let him down badly and that he had to take some responsibility for their lack of judgment. But I just feel like nobody really thinks that this guy is a cheater. And I thought the decision was a sound one, and I hope it stands, because if it does, I think we'll see him move beyond this the way he did at the Open and continue to play great tennis the rest of the year and really for a number of years to come.
I want to throw a couple of other tennis points out there with Sinner. First of all, you mentioned how he raised his game for the final, how well he handled himself in that match against Fritz, where he was the overwhelming favorite, and admitted there was more pressure on him this time compared to the Australian Open, and I don't think anybody could argue with that. You look at what
Right.
he's done in finals recently: straight sets in Rotterdam, straight sets with an absolute masterclass against Grigor Dimitrov in Miami. I mean, you just can't play a better match. He beat Hurkacz in straight sets in Halle. He beat Tiafoe in the final of Cincinnati in straight sets. He's not only on a massive streak of winning finals, and his career record in finals is just outstanding. With one of the few blips. Actually, the only final he's lost since 2023 was the year-end championship against Djokovic. He's barely losing sets in these finals. And that brings me to one more point. I was coming into the tournament thinking, okay, the one thing I'm not sure about with Jannik is the physical endurance, especially because of all of the setbacks that he had over the summer in terms of his fitness. I was a little worried, is he going to be able to survive a war? And it didn't matter because he never got into a war, not even
Yeah.
close. And sometimes that's another way to kind of even avoid having to answer that question, is just blow everybody out, which is basically what he did.
Yeah, true, true. I thought there was the potential for the Medvedev. Going in, I definitely thought there was potential that he and Medvedev could go five. And I think if Medvedev who had a chance to break first in the fourth set, could have gone up 4-2. He had two break points. It would have given him 4-2 in the fourth and might have carried him into a fifth. I still would have liked Sinner's chances, but that was the closest he came. Obviously, that was the closest call to it. But strange match. I'm sure you agree, to have three lopsided sets in a row and then finally 6-4 in the fourth to Sinner. But he avoided it there he came through in the clutch in the middle of that fourth set, which was the only time that both guys were playing well at the same time.
Yeah, very strange match. I mean, both players probably felt very fresh going into the fourth because all three of the
Yeah.
sets prior were so quick. Uh,
True.
it was odd. I mean, let's talk about that because it felt like it could be the de facto final at the time. Zverev just didn't look right. So him losing to Fritz, I believe the next day was not a huge shock. And you looked at Sinner and Medvedev being two of the top tier hardcourt players in recent times, meeting in the quarterfinals. It was like, okay, well, winner of this quarter might be the favorite to win the title. And as we've alluded to, 3 sets, blowouts, both directions. Medvedev won the second, I believe, 6-1.
Yes.
But
Yes.
overall, Steve, I don't know how you felt about that match. I, I thought Sinner was very comfortable in the match. He didn't, he was actually kind of took it to Daniil in playing Medvedev's favorite game. It was a lot of east-west tennis on the baseline. Sinner
Yeah.
never had to get all that creative. He said, I could beat you backhand to backhand. I can beat you forehand to forehand. Like, I don't think Medvedev was at a high enough level to really pose the problems that he normally poses on the court against Jannik Sinner. I thought Sinner was very comfortable in that match.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Although I did feel that when Medvedev grabbed the second set, 6-1, and I thought he picked his game up a lot, and early in the third was critical. And we see this sometimes. It's inexplicable to me with top players because they know the dangers. When you come off a winning set, it's like reminds me a bit of Fritz winning the second set from Tiafoe, hard fought 7-5 set to make it a set all, and then plays a terrible game to start the third set. And it cost him the third set. It could have cost him the match. It didn't, but it could have. And Medvedev at the start of the third had to sustain that level and didn't. And then Sinner, to me, jumped on him. And you're right. He was very comfortable in the rally patterns in the match. And he just resumed his mastery from the baseline. But I was hoping, I thought we were in for a very tight third. I was a little disappointed that the third got away from Medvedev so quickly, the way the second had gotten away from Sinner. So, but you're right. In terms of the patterns, in terms of how it played out, you couldn't fault Sinner much. He didn't play terrible in the second. Frankly, I thought it was more that Medvedev played extraordinarily well. And but the other 3 sets from Sinner were first rate.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why we had the lopsided sets were neither of the serves were really doing a ton of damage. So when Medvedev went off kilter with baseline errors, it really hurt him quickly because his serves were coming back. And, Jannik, for as much as he's improved his serve against Medvedev as a returner, his serve is coming back. So I think that was a big part of it. Again, for Daniil, I think it's a bigger issue because he needs his serve to help him out like it was.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly. I was going to say it's a lingering issue with him.
Yeah.
Served pretty well at times, not the whole match against Sinner at Wimbledon, but by and large, he served well in that win. But it's not coming through for him, and it seems to be one of the major differences. And here he now finds himself almost a year and a half without a title. The Rome of last year, that's a long, long time for a player of his stature who plays that many events. And I think it's got to be bugging him a bit. And I'm sure he also, by the way, maybe one of the reasons for his uneven performance against Sinner here was he may have been thinking kind of like we did. He wasn't going to take it for granted, but in his mind, he thought, if I can beat Jannik, I've got a really good chance to win this tournament. I honestly think he believed that going in. I don't mean he got way ahead of himself, but he was aware of what that match represented and what it could mean, and that there was a pretty good chance that whoever won it would go on to take the title. Whatever the case, the serve has not been coming through. It's not as consistently big as it was. I thought it was a much scarier weapon, certainly in 21 when he beat Novak in the final. I mean, and through that period, you felt like he could serve his way through matches, that the serve was going to be, I don't want to say the cornerstone of his game, but close to it, because that incredible consistency, the brick wall he could put up from the backboard, but then winning the cheap points with the serve, with big first serves. And it's just not happening nearly as often. It's got to be worrisome to him. He knows what that shot means to him.
Agreed. And I think the brick wall isn't as brick wally at the moment either.
Yeah, true.
And look, he's tried to, we wanted for a long time, take the next steps in terms of adaptation. Maybe, develop more comfort in the forecourt, be more comfortable building some offense with your forehand from the baseline. I actually think he's have alternate return positions. He's actually done these things, but I think he's lost his bread and butter at the same time. And that's kind of my overall read on Daniil at the moment.
Wait a minute. Tell me what you mean when you say the bread and butter. You mean the baseline unerring consistency from the baseline, or do you mean
Well,
combination of the serve and the baseline?
both, right?
Yeah.
So if I were to summarize 2021 Daniil Medvedev, I'd say first serve, huge weapon, shortens the points for him, does damage for him, gets him free points. Once the rallies start, he doesn't miss. He covers the court exceptionally well.
Right.
He defends and absorbs everything. And he's just going to make you suffer physically, basically. And he's going to make you be great to beat him in every rally.
Yeah.
And both of those things, like his identity as a player, it's changed a little bit. But I think it's not that the weaknesses have become a bigger problem. It's that the strengths have dulled.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I also think he's trying to generate more pace off his forehand. I feel he's trying to be more aggressive off his forehand, which might be leading to more errors. It's impressive when he's timing it well, but there are times when he's missing too. I feel like the two-hander is pretty solid, but the forehand can be make or break, and that's another change for this period. But whatever's going on, Gil, it's got to be a great concern. Heading into next year, he really needs something extraordinary to happen in the fall. Win a Paris Masters 1000, something like that. Say win that and get to the final of Turin, something that carries him into next year feeling like he's his old self. Because otherwise, I don't know when. I don't know how he breaks the syndrome. It's been a long, difficult period for him since the middle of 23. Even though we know he got to that Open final, it's true. Even though we know he got to the Australian final, I don't want to ignore those. But certainly since Australia, there has been no follow up.
Yeah, it hasn't looked how he would want it to look since then. Totally agree. Let's get into some other players. Taylor Fritz, surprise level. I mean, on one hand, he wasn't in form after the Olympics. He took early losses in Canada and Cincinnati. He had never made it past a major quarterfinal. And for those two reasons, wasn't really on my radar as a major contender coming into this US Open. On the other hand, big picture, first of all, I think he's never gotten enough respect for the skills that he does have. People like to focus on what he doesn't have. Which I've always found that in terms of the analysis as Fritz as a player. I mean, here's a guy who's great off of both wings. He makes his returns. He's got a big first serve. He competes extremely hard. There's so much to like. And if you look at his path, I'm not really surprised in him beating anyone. And that includes Zverev, who he has had a great head-to-head against now. Ever since the first two meetings when Taylor was really, really young and well outside the top 30. He has actually beaten Zverev more than Zverev has beaten him since those first two meetings. So that's almost my stance on like how surprising was this. It's almost like yes and no for me. I think that Taylor was good enough to do this, and I'm glad to see him break through and do it.
Yeah, no, I agree largely with what you're saying. I didn't think though that Zverev was going to lose to him, and this is not disrespect to Fritz, but it's respect for Sasha. Didn't see him losing in successive majors to Taylor. And I thought he'd respond partially because he had the 2-set lead at Wimbledon and it got away, and great comeback for Taylor to beat him in 5 on the center court. But I thought for that reason, I thought that Zverev was going to be kind of on his guard, and he was aware of Alcaraz and Djokovic, their losses. So maybe there was a great sense of possibility again for him to think he could win this title. But I don't say that disrespectfully to Fritz, because I agree with all your points about him. None of them were shocking. I was more mildly surprised by Fritz beating Zverev again. Not shocked, obviously, not at all. And what impressed me about that, in addition to all you said, was how he was so much better in the 2 tiebreaks than Sasha. That's really what decided that match, with the first and 4-set tiebreaks. And he was just much better than Sasha, and he's the one not making the mistakes. But what backs your point up too, Gil, is that you probably heard his remarks after the final, where Fritz said, look, he looked back on the tournament, never felt that he played an extraordinary match. Just thought he played well enough, good, okay, solid. but in his mind, not like he played out of his mind in any of those matches. So he agrees with you. And that encourages him because he feels like, okay, I actually could have played better in this tournament, but I made the final. And I almost got that third set from I almost got the third set from Sinner and prolonged the match. So he feels like, okay, not my very best tennis, but look where it got me, 2 rounds further than I've ever been at a major, and 3 sets away from winning a major. So I just feel like I agree with you. He does so many things well, and also on top of what you said, his movement is better than it was. He's still never going to be as quick as a lot of the other guys, but it's far better than it was, say, 2 years ago or even a year ago. And that's to his credit as well. So it was nice to see it happen, and nice to see his attitude about it all. The self-belief and the recognition that he can still get better.
Yeah, he's such a competitive guy. I mean, people who know him always talk about his expectations for himself, and his how hard he is on himself, and how driven he is to keep moving up. How critical were you of Taylor not moving forward a lot against Sinner in that final until he did do it a little more in the third?
Yeah, I agree with that. I just feel like that's a big area for him to think about it. I feel like he still doesn't trust his volley as much as he should. When he came forward a few times late in the third, when he built that 5-3 lead in the third, I thought there were signs of a willingness to go in, a confidence to go in. But otherwise, the swing volley he missed near the end, that doesn't help when he misses a shot like that. But he should trust himself more. He should say, look, I've got to do it more. And the more I do it, the better I'm going to get up there. And he knows his volley is not on the same level as his ground game, but he could get it there. He could bring it there. And it's going to take a willingness to maybe flub a few volleys here and there, but keep coming in when you have the openings. Yeah, he could have done it more, no doubt.
There were matches in the tournament where he did do it more. And I think it has to do with the fear that Sinner instills. Like he's not going to give you a floater. He's going to hit the pass.
Yeah.
And you have to be confident in your volleys to go up there. And I agree that that's where Taylor's not at that level yet. I think he's improved. I think he's shown improvement at this tournament. But in order to hit approach shots against Sinner, knowing that he's going to drive the pass probably pretty hard, and you might be dealing with difficult volleys, that's where you're going to see Taylor say, no thanks, I'm staying back.
Yeah, I agree.
To your point, he missed the swing volley at the end. He also, on the break point for Sinner, missed the forehand volley off of the ball that came fast right at him.
Yeah, true. No, he was a little off balance. I think these are things he's going to be thinking about and addressing, and certainly the likes of Michael Russell and Paul Annacone, they'll be talking to him about it too. But I think the technique can improve on the volley, and I think it will improve. But part of it is just the willingness, and with Sinner, okay, just make him come up with those passes. The other thing that Sinner does, in addition to what you said, Gill, is he's going to make you play a lot of lower volleys. He's smart enough to make sure he keeps those passage shots down and forces you to volley up. But again, that's something that Taylor should be willing to he should be willing to deal with that.
Yeah. How close to the ceiling do you think he is as a player?
Well, I guess on a percentage basis, I'd say he's about 80 to 85% of what he can be. And that last 15 to 20% is huge. Let's face it. He's close, but he's not there. He's not, maybe it won't happen until he's 28, 29. It may be a couple of years off for all we know, because this was, no matter whatever happens the rest of this year, this was a big year for him to be in a Grand Slam final like this. And I hope he finishes the year strong, but I would put him in the 80 to 85% range with a good chance to eventually get himself 95 to 100%. How do you feel about it?
I think the mental aspect is maybe larger than any of the physical and technical stuff. I think finally going on a deep run at a major hopefully just creates a better big match player, a guy who doesn't tighten up as often in big spots, because as much as Fritz, I think, always had like a lot of belief in himself, I do think he had some nerve management issues in big matches that cost him, especially if you think about when he played Nadal, for example, in his first major quarterfinal at
Yeah,
Wimbledon, and
yeah,
Rafa couldn't serve. And you just
right.
saw how Fritz kind of seized up and lost his identity and his offensive intention. I don't think that's going to happen to him anymore. I don't even think it happened to him in the final. I know there was some thought that he was playing with a lot of nerves, but I saw it as, more so he just didn't really have his A game in terms of timing the ball, but he was still making all the right decisions on the court and still backing himself and being aggressive and going after the ball. But yeah, I think that and the transition game making him a better offensive player, that's where I think he can get better. I I also don't think he's ever going to close the gap that we saw against Jannik Sinner in the movement department. You don't really see a player of his nature at his age be able to make that kind of jump in the movement.
Yeah, agreed. I totally agreed. I would say this, Gil, related to the nerves and the mental agility. I felt there were times he was tight against Tiafoe. I mean, he got up 3-love in the first set,
Agreed.
lost 6 in the next set. But this is why it's an impressive win, by the way, because the first set, 6 out of 7 games he lost after being up 3-love. And then I thought at the end of the third, he played the bad game at the start of the third and then had love 30 in the last game. And he made 4 errors in a row when he might have been back on serve and might have salvaged that set. But then what he did to pull out the 4th set was very impressive to me. And regardless of Francis and how he may have collapsed, I think Taylor was poised to win that match in the 5th. So he overcame it. I felt like in the first set, I was surprised the way that first set slipped away so quickly after having the early break.
Yep, I agree. And he admitted he was pretty stressed out ahead of that one. Let's hit on Francis Tiafoe.
Mm.
For me, he's one of one. Normally, players try to depressurize themselves. So they might say, you might ask a player, let's say a French player coming into Roland Garros or an Aussie going into the Australian Open, and they'll say, yeah, this means a lot to me, but I'm trying to kind of take it as any other tournament and just, basically do my thing, not do anything different or special, right? And it's sometimes you try to downplay it. You don't want to put too much pressure on yourself. And then here's Francis. He comes into the tournament and he's like, this is the one circled on my calendar. This is going to make or break my year. And normally that would be completely inadvisable for a player to put so much weight onto one event. You're going to put too much pressure on yourself. Francis is a different animal because the pressure makes him better. The bright lights make him better. And to think about his regular results over the course of the other 3 majors, including the Australian Open, and just what we know about him as a 10, 11-month player versus 2 US Open semis in the last 4 years, all 4 years making at least the quarterfinals, is just amazing to me.
Yeah, it is amazing. And he talked about it. And obviously, he sees a double-edged sword because he'd like to be able to perform more regularly at that level. I'm fascinated to see where he goes from here. He took this hard, and I thought that was a good sign. He took it harder in some ways than he did the Alcaraz loss in the semis a couple of years ago, 22. And he felt like he said he felt like he was the better player for much of the match, and obviously he was devastated that it got away from him in the end. I thought he could have given Fritz a bit more of the credit, but so be it. He was hard on himself, and that part I think is healthy. Then he also talked about trying to finish the year strong, and he said something about, I don't want to do it half-assed. I'm going to go after this. That's all good, but I want to see the proof because he talks big, and he's a great guy. Don't get me wrong. The congeniality, the respect he has from everybody else, he's so good for the game, and he's a good-natured guy, but he also wants to be thought of as someone who's raising the popularity of the game.
Yes.
And in his way, he's done that already, but he'd raise it a lot more if he won these majors. I mean, it's sort of up to him to do that, I think, to really take it himself and the game to another level if that's what he wants to do. And the first step would be, like he said, finish this year strong. Show that this Open was just not just his sort of annual annual great showing at his country's Grand Slam event. And he turned on the switch and pulled it off again. But keep going. Try to get that ranking much closer to the top 10 by the end of the year, but maybe between 10 and 15 with some good results. But push on, and then show us starting in Australia what he can do. And I'm curious to see if he can prove that to himself and to us, because I'm not convinced, but I'm glad that he really wants to try.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be interesting, and it's crazy because it's so much about intensity and attitude, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean,
and sometimes he doesn't have that. And obviously he talked about the anxiety that came over him. And obviously you saw he was just deflated in those first 4 games of the 5th. And I don't, whether this is technical cramps or not, but he was definitely fading. And that, but I remember he had a long spell during the Alcaraz match too, after winning the first set, where he looked dead on his feet, and he managed to get back into that match and take it into the 5th. So I don't know really what happens with these mood swings or the physical declines, but he needs to address that too, because I honestly think part of what happened out there is that he is not as fit as Fritz, and that Fritz kind of knew that deep down. If I can hang a little longer, and Michael Russell was trying to remind Fritz of that, hang in there, you can do this. And in the end, he was stronger physically, and Francis needs to be able to match his old friend in that department.
Yeah, the gas tank in best of 5 has really never been very good for Tiafoe. So, you'd love to see maybe that does mean that a big best of 3 event, could be his ticket, to a big title in his career, especially on the hard courts, like a Miami or who knows. But
yeah,
that is somewhat of a concern. I found it interesting that he said that he was more nervous than tired after the match.
Right.
It certainly looked like tired.
I thought so too. I was convinced it was tiring. Maybe they were intertwined, but I feel like whatever the case, he also maybe needs to do something a little bit different in terms of his training, so that we wouldn't be able to say he has issues with best of 5. And that shouldn't be getting in his way, because the majors are what he wants. I mean, obviously, if he could choose one, it would be the Open, but you've got to be fully fit. And there's no doubt that there were stages against Alcaraz 2 years ago where he just didn't look strong enough. And there's no doubt that here in the 5th, there was nothing left against Fritz.
Yep. All right, we've hit on the other 3 semifinalists, so let's pay it off with Jack Draper. Made the semis without dropping a set. He has teamed up with Wayne Ferreira. Immediately has found some great results, including at Queens. He is much more imposing offensively as of late, which puts less of a strain on the physical side. For a while, the consistency in the movement was admirable for his size, but you wondered if it was really the best way for him to play. And I think he's discovered the answer to that is no. And he's being much more aggressive now in all facets of his game. How good do you think Jack Draper can be? What do you see in him?
Yeah, I was very impressed. I watched him take apart de Minaur and in straight, and then I obviously saw the whole Sinner match. And I mean, the forehand, he's got so much work on that forehand. It's got such heavy spin, and backhand is pretty true, and on the serve can be devastating. And obviously he served really well most of that match, certainly those first 2 sets against Sinner, and finally caught up with him in the 3rd. But no, I feel like Draper, I'd be really surprised if we didn't see him next year making a move toward the top 5 in the world. That's how I would put it. He's going to be closing in on the top 5, I suspect, maybe by Wimbledon. I think he's that good. Where he goes from there, I'm not sure, but he's a much better player than I thought he was, than I thought he would be. And I agree with all the things you just said about him. And again, I don't think he's anywhere near his ceiling yet either, but he's really learning how to get the most out of his game. And obviously the serve, what impressed me about the serve, by the way, against Sinner, I guess I said earlier, I didn't think Sinner was at his best off the ground, but that wide slice in the ad court, and Jannik knows it's coming, and he still couldn't handle it. I think that's going to be true of a lot of players. There's just so much on that serve. And that's the weapon every left-hander wants to have, is to be able to count on his wide slice. You know, and Rafa tried to utilize it, but Rafa is a very good server. Is he a great server? I don't know. This is a really classic, great lefty serve. And also he can do a lot with it in the deuce court as well. But I feel like he wins so many big points with that wide slice in the ad court against everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I watched Jannik Sinner basically pick apart every serve he faced at the US Open. First set against Jack Draper, it was a lot for him. I mean, it was impressive to see. Now, Jack lost his legs there, and it kind of all caught up with him, and the conditions were brutal, and he wasn't holding in his water, it seemed.
Yeah.
It became a very strange spectacle.
Yeah, even with that, though, he's getting sick more than once. He still got that second set into a breaker. I mean, with all that he was enduring, he made it so competitive. And that's an encouraging sign for him, too, I think. That on a day like that, when he wasn't feeling great, that he still is playing Jannik Sinner that close for 2 sets.
Yeah, I love to see the toughness. I agree with you. I mean, both ground strokes are really nice. The volley is there, the serve is there, moves well for his size, but he just needs to not rely too much on the movement, because he's, that's where, okay, you're not moving like Sinner and Alcaraz. So let's make sure to dictate as much as possible. And I think, once he's gets into that frame of mind, I agree with you. I think he's going to be top 10 next year. I predicted him to just miss the top 10 this year, and let's see how much of a push he can make before the end of the year.
But you know what, Gil? The other thing I just want to add, in addition to that, I was just thinking about it, I think there's a bit more Andy Murray in him than Tim Henman, if you know what I mean. Temperament, edge, toughness. I mean that as a compliment, that he's going to be a fierce competitor, and I don't want to demean Tim. I don't mean it that way at all. Tim had a great career, and he was an underrated competitor. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of Murray in him in terms of how he goes about his business and the ferocity. I feel it's going to be there, and it's going to serve him very well.
He's been injured so much. So I wonder if that's almost built up his calluses and his toughness, not just as a player, but as a person. And I've also been really impressed, for the most part, with how he's handled big occasions in his career. Like very early on, you saw, like at the US Open in 2022, he beat Felix Auger-Aliassime in one of his first big matches at a slam. He played Djokovic well in his debut. He was ranked 253 in the world and stepped on the center court and played pretty well. So like, we've seen that character out of him. And of course, the Alcaraz win at Queens earlier this year would be another example. So
great example. He earned that, and I was on the grass. He took full advantage of his serve, and it's a lot of good signs. And to be in the semis here and acquit himself that well, and I think he now sees himself differently. And I mean, the top 10, that's short order. I think he's going to be heading toward top 5, middle to late of next year. I'll be surprised if he doesn't have the results to be at least bordering on the top 5.
Both Jannik Sinner and Aryna Sabalenka, the singles champions, did not play at the Olympics. I'm taking this somewhere. But first, I want to ask you if you think that's a coincidence.
No, not at all. Not at all. Listen, you look at Djokovic, look at Alcaraz. They played this gem of an Olympic final. To me, one of the most enjoyable matches of the year. 2 guys very close to the top of their games. Arguably, I mean, a few weeks after Wimbledon. In any case, they play the final. Djokovic gets an enormous lift out of it. It's realizing a lifelong dream, a career-long dream, to finally get the goal. Carlos is heartbroken to come close and lose in 2 tiebreakers. So they come to New York. Carlos in between goes to Cincinnati. I think Carlos was still a bit depressed about what happened in Paris, because he wanted it so bad. He knew that Djokovic had played a great match, but obviously it's very hard to not lose your serve in a match and go down in straight sets. That's what happened to him. And so I feel like there was the carryover for him. For Novak, it was too soon, having been to the top of the mountain. It was just not quite enough time, I think, to get his competitive juices back. And on top of that, he had trouble with his serve. He had no rhythm. He knew that, and he was the one, we commenting earlier about the importance of free points on serve with Medvedev. But he said about himself that he thought, he's at this level, you need to win free points on your serve. He wasn't happy with his serve at all. But the biggest problem, I think, was an emotional letdown. And he and Alcaraz both had emotional letdowns for different reasons. So I don't think it was an accident. And then Sinner was not there. Sinner was sitting somewhere watching it on television, appreciating it and gearing himself up for I think he was in Canada, wasn't he? But in any case,
yes,
he was thinking about the Open. And yeah, absolutely. It's very hard if the Olympics were a little closer to Wimbledon, but given where it was on the calendar, it's a little soon to recover from that. And you have to change surfaces too, but more so it's like throwing another major in. Technically, obviously, it's not a Grand Slam event, but it might as well be. And you're throwing that in after Paris and Wimbledon, and then up comes the Open. It's just absolutely too soon. Yeah,
I agree. I think as it is, the calendar is really difficult on the players, and then this just took it to another level. I do think, I like how you kind of took it through both players mentally and how it might have been different for each of them in terms of the matches itself. And Djokovic with the serving, I completely agree with you. I'll throw out there that he was seemingly having upper back issues all through qualifying week. And it wasn't covered all that much, but like I was at his practice against Juan Martín del Potro. He was getting massaged in the upper back region in between points by his physio. Canceled practice the next day, cut short a practice with Holger Rune. They were scheduled for 2 hours and ended up being 1. I don't know if that's why the serve was so out of whack, but it was. But then the other thing we saw, even with the serve being really at a level that's going to sabotage his ability to win no matter what, the emotional flatness was very evident against Alexei Popyrin.
It absolutely was, and the first 2 sets, there was just no life. And then finally he did find it in the third and started to spur himself on a bit, and it carried over into early in the fourth. But again, the serve let him down again, a couple of long games, eventually 14 double faults. And yeah, I mean, what you're saying is very interesting. And I was reading those reports. I didn't know you were at those sessions, but I was reading about it, seeing people tweeting about it and concerned about it. And obviously he didn't discuss it. He didn't discuss it, Gill, but I got to believe that would be a factor in the serve. And that couldn't have helped, on top of the fact that he's having trouble getting himself up to the intensity that he felt he needed. You throw the two together, because look, we know Popyrin played him tough in Australia. I get it. Tough 4-setter there, tough 4-setter at Wimbledon. But this was, the first 2 sets were pretty easy. Popyrin didn't even have to work that hard. Novak also had a love 40 in the first set that would have put him up the break, that could have changed things too, that he didn't take advantage of at all. So there were a lot of things, but he didn't seem to have that fist pumping going and that sense of urgency until the middle of the third. And you could see him trying to find it early in the fourth. But the press seats are down low, and a lot of times those guys look up into the corner right near where we are, looking up toward the fans, and you see them when they're starting to rouse themselves. And you could see he was almost trying to manufacture it, but it wasn't there. It wasn't the full-fledged where he really shakes his fist and looks up at the crowd, and not even the ears, but just the hands and the intensity. It wasn't there. And it was a giveaway. And then I think he probably was a bit irked by the way that Popyrin was kind of cocky. That's fine. I guess you have to be at a certain level, but Popyrin was almost trying to imitate Novak, appealing to the crowd, and do it himself and do it louder, do it even more expressively. So who knows what was going on? But I'm just saying, I still think it all related to the Olympics. He seemed to be saying that too, basically saying this was the U.S. Open. In other words, almost like I had to come here and try, but he just wasn't sure he had it in him at that point. I don't think there's going to be that, regardless of what he does in the fall. I think he'll feel like he still got a lot out of the year by winning the Olympics, and he'll come back strong. And same with Carlos. And again, I'm not sure he's going to do much in the fall either, Gil, because it's not, the indoor season is not his favorite time of the year. He didn't do well last year. He's going to be thinking about Australia too. So I think in a strange way, once again, they'll be in the same boat where maybe neither one of them plays that great or does that much across the autumn, but that they'll be training hard and gearing up for Melbourne. And that's when we'll see them back near their best again.
Yeah.
But yeah, get to your point about the two champions. Yeah, the fact that they were not in Paris, no accident whatsoever.
Right. On the Alcaraz front, straight set loss to Botic, which was as surprising as the result was that Alcaraz didn't win a set, which is extremely rare. I mean, if not a lot of straight set losses in his career, if you look at that.
Yeah.
But part of me wants to say, why isn't he able to just raise his floor? Like, is his worst level unnecessarily erratic and wasteful and error filled? Like, part of me feels that way. The other part of me stops myself and I say, well, he hasn't really taken any bad losses at a major. This is the first one. So you got to cut him some slack. It happens. Where are you on that spectrum?
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think it was a much worse loss compared to, say, Djokovic losing to Popyrin. But regardless, he got caught off guard. It was like 1, 5, and 4 were the scores. Yeah, I think you got to cut him the slack. I do. I don't think there's gonna. I don't think we're going to see that happen to him too often. I think he got it was a bit surprising to see him break back in the second and third sets and not being able to make anything of that. And I think when he broke back in the third, I think he thought he might be turning the corner. He was starting to smile, but it just didn't work out for him. And yeah, I think it's kind of an anomaly, although obviously the Monfils loss in Cincy was a bit shocking in its way in the aftermath of the Olympics. And he just was not in the right frame of mind. You could even see it, Gil, on Juan Carlos Ferrero's face. He didn't even be able to seem to be able to.
That was off, right? The vibes were a little bit off.
Yeah, they were. But I agree with you. And I don't think it's so much that why can't he do better on his off days? Why can't he reduce the errors enough to be? Because we did see him. I mean, you'd say the Tiafoe match. Obviously, Francis played a great match against him at Wimbledon, but still, Carlos was off, and he found a way to pull that out. And there were a bunch of matches at Wimbledon like that where I didn't feel he played that well. Humbert, I mean, I think of a lot of occasions where he wasn't great, but when he had to buckle down, he got the job done. This was not one of those nights. So I think we'd have to see something comparable in Australia before we need to get concerned, because most of the other losses, as you say, they're not straight, and he's losing to he's lost a couple of times at majors to Zverev, and I mean, he lost to Medvedev at the Open last year. It's usually top guys, and it's not straight, and it's competitive. So I'm not too concerned, but I do think he probably needs a little bit of a break, and he doesn't. And the other good news for him is that Djokovic obviously knows there's no thought of number one for him. For him, it's can he qualify for Turin if he wants to. For Carlos, it's like he's way too far back of Sinner to be thinking about ending the year number one. So he doesn't have to even be thinking in those terms. Pick a few spots in the fall, try to play well, and then be thinking about Australia for next year. But we won't see him turn in many performances like this one again.
Fully agree. All right, Steve, that'll wrap up the U.S. Open chatter. Let me throw an idea at you that I teased at the start. I'm a fan of tier lists. So instead of like ranking, and I'm sure you've gotten many requests, Steve, give me your ranking for best players of all time. That I think is too difficult, and sometimes it gets a little messy and unnecessarily minute. But in terms of tiers, I love that, and I'd love to do a thing with maybe yourself and Joel Drucker where we kind of create the tiers for the greatest of all time.
Sure. Well, let's follow up on that idea, and you'll tell me more about it. But that sounds like fun. That sounds like we get a podcast out of it.
I think so. Off season. Yeah. All right, that's my idea. Steve, thanks so much. Pleasure as always. And it's been not only a great last hour chatting U.S. Open, but a great 2024 of doing these with you.
Yeah, and this one was enjoyable because I think you were absolutely right to steer us away from any kind of in-depth discussion of the final. It didn't require it. So I think we were able to cover some other ground that hopefully our listeners enjoyed.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Gil.